Okay, everyone, this is going to be a quick overview of my trading platform in Thinkorswim, or better known as TOS. I basically trade futures intraday. Currently, I'm trading the Russell because of existing margin requirements. It's the one vehicle that gives me the most opportunity to put on the kind of contracts that I'd like to put on for my trades. So I'm going to review my platform, which you see here, and go item by item in terms of what indicators I use to trade intraday. The first thing I want to point out is the labels that I have across my chart. They're basic labels, just helping me visualize what the current RSI is, the current CCI is, what the ADX is, what the tick count is, and that's on the New York Stock Exchange, as well as a proprietary indicator that I call the vol squeeze, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But this label on the RSI turns green when it's above 50, and it turns red when it's below 50. CCI is red when it's below 0, and green when it's above 0. The ADX I have set at, I believe it's 20, which is an indication that the strength of the momentum that the price action is currently in is strong enough to warrant a breakout trade. The tick count is just negative or positive tick counts on the New York Stock Exchange. And we'll go into the vol squeeze in a little bit later in this presentation. Now I'm going to go through and add the individual indicators that I use on this chart, and I'll move this out of the way so that you can see them when I add it to the chart. The first thing I'm going to do, I reviewed the labels. Now we're going to look at the pivot points. These are the daily pivots, and when I add that to the chart, you'll see that the pivot points appear on the chart. I'd have to crunch it a little bit because of the volatility in this market right now. These are the support levels. I believe there's 3. Yes, there's 3. The white line is the middle pivot point. The red are the resistance lines, R1, R2, and up here R3. Let me get rid of this. Okay, we'll go back and go back to auto on the chart. So that's the pivot points. The next thing I want to point out is the 8 and the 13 EMA crossover, or moving averages. The white line is the 8, the blue line is the 13. And I do have a indicator that shows me when there's a crossover of these two lines, and I'll show you what those are in just a second. Here we have the moving average crossover below and the moving average crossover above. Now if we add these two lines, to our indicator list, press OK, you will see that it generates at the close of this bar whether or not the price is now the 8 EMA is above the 13, and it is going to show an orange downward arrow when it is confirmed that it is below, the 8 is below the 13. So these are my basic trend indicators that have me looking for potential trades when I see this signal. Now another thing that I add that helps to verify the strength of this movement would be the Hull moving average. And this is an indicator. These are all indicators that are available as standard on TOS. When I add this study, you'll see that a dotted line is formed, and it's green when it's sloping up, and it turns red when it starts to slope down. When I get an indication that price is now above the 13, the 8 is above the 13, and I look to see if pricing is above the hull. The next thing I do is see what happens on the next bar and to see what the strength of that bar may be. But still, everything is pointing to take a trade, but I still think there are some other indicators that can help me verify whether I want to go into the trade or not. And that, of course, has to do with these labels up here, which are in real time. So I can't go back and show you what they are here. But we're looking for a green RSI, a green CCI, and an ADX above 20, and hopefully a positive tick, although I wouldn't necessarily use that as a deal breaker here. And we'll review the vol squeeze indicator as I add that to the chart. The next indicator I'm going to put on here is the previous session high and low. Why is that important? Well, usually price has a tendency to migrate back to where yesterday's session lows and highs and opens are. And what this shows is that this was the low of yesterday's session, and if we crunch this chart, we'll see the high of that session up here. And you can see this high is above one of the pivot points that show resistance. So I look at these as possible targets when price starts gyrating towards these lines. One more indicator that I'm going to add, and that is probably the most important indicator that I can add to this chart, and it's called the VWAP. And this shows up on the chart. Whoop, did I not click on it? VWAP, where did we go here? It appears on my chart as a blue line, and I've added the 2 standard deviation lines for the VWAP. Down here, the green line is where we would certainly be concerned if price reached that level in terms of being oversold. And again, the red line would be overbought. Price doesn't always go up to these standard deviation lines, but they're there again as a reference point, especially if I'm looking for a target. Now, the importance of the VWAP is this. It's a simple average based on price action and volume, which is the concept that I use to trade on an intraday basis. This indicator only is used intraday, and the smaller the time frame, and I use a 3-minute time frame, probably the more effective this line becomes. This is where institutions probably would wind up either selling or buying depending on what their orders are. They don't want to overpay for something, and they don't want to overpay or sell a price that may be below this. So when you see price come to this line, you may see some big institutional orders come in, and they may not be all at once. You may see price bounce up if there's an institutional trader that wants to buy, or you may see it go down. The slope of the VWAP is important to give you an idea as to what the strength of the price action is. As you can see here at the open, it was pointing down, which told us that we had a strong bearish scenario. Also, you can also see that the 8 was below the 13, which is another indicator, and the hull was above the pricing, but red pointing down. So you can see how all these indicators can come into play. Now, another thing that you have down here is the volume indicator, and I have something that I find helpful. It shows you the daily average, today's average, where it is in a percentage to the overall average, the average volume per bar. So when that current bar's volume exceeds the average bar, this will turn green, which will flash at you as an indication that volume is coming in. So when you get to the VWAP, if price comes down to it or up to it, you want to pay attention to this little label right here to see if it's green, which tells you that either there's a selling situation going on or a major buying situation where volume is coming in on either side. One more average that I'm going to add here is, previous session high-low, okay. This is a neat indicator because it gives me an idea as to what has happened at the open. When there is a gap down, you will see a red line here and here. This is the close of yesterday. This is the open of today. And it will shade here, and this shaded area will disappear as price winds up going into this gap. This white line here is the midpoint of that gap, and gaps are important because, as you can see today in this chart, price did want to start migrating towards closing the gap. And this gap, either here or here, are good resistance points or target points when you enter a trade long, and it helps give you an idea of where you want to take profits. I find that an interesting and helpful study as well. We're going to add one more study here, and this may make the chart look a little busy, but I'll show you why I like to use it. It's called the ribbon study. And if I can find it here, I will add it to the chart. There it is. It's called the moving average exponential ribbon. Again, this is a standard TOS study that you can find in your drop-down list for studies. What this does, it throws a ribbon of moving averages. And why I like it is it'll help you determine whether the market is starting to transition into a sideways movement. When these lines are all pointing down, it's a good indication that you have a strong bearish scenario setting up. When they start to come back up and start to consolidate, you may get into a situation where pricing will be in a sidewards movement. Once the lines break up and start to separate, obviously the first moving average is strong, which sort of follows the 8, and all the lines are above each other. That's a strong trend, and it just gives me a better visualization using my other indicators such as the cross, the 8 and the 13 cross, as well as the VWAP, what direction the trade may be going. You don't have to put that on your chart if it makes it seem too busy for you, but that's how I use it. The next indicator that I'm going to add here is the squeeze. I think most of you are familiar with John Carter, who has several proprietary indicators that are available on TOS, but his most popular and probably the one that I find the most useful is the squeeze indicator. When I add that to the chart, you'll see a histogram, and you'll see some green lights, and you'll see a red light. When you start seeing well, I call them lights, but they're dots. When you start to see a red dot, it's going into a squeeze. Now, what the Carter squeeze indicator is based on is two channels, two bands actually, the Bollinger Band and the Keltner bands. And when the Keltner bands start to close inside the Bollinger bands, that creates a squeeze, and that's what these red dots are. I also added a label, and when you see a squeeze, this label will light up on your chart. It'll also tell you how many dots into the squeeze you are, or into a fired long squeeze or a fired short squeeze. When a blue histogram, dark blue histogram starts, you are off of a squeeze. You are now in a long squeeze. And usually squeezes last 4 or 5 bars. Sometimes they go as high as 7, but once they go past 7, this will disappear, and you may want to consider getting out of your trade. The strength of the histogram is also important. You can see here you started to get some bullish momentum showing on the squeeze, but we didn't get much action. Well, that's because we really didn't burst out of anything. However, you can see here on this basic bar, we've came out of a 2-dot squeeze, and it's showing positive momentum all the way down to this bar here when it started to reverse. Again, the squeeze alone isn't going to make you a successful trader, but it also adds to your observation of the overall price action and volume action that's taking place in the market, tick by tick and bar by bar. I also have a timer here that's set to 3 minutes, so it gives me an indication as to how many seconds are left until this bar closes. Since I use price action as my basic tool to trade, I like to know how close to the close of that bar I am before I make a trading decision. This is not part of TOS. This was a separate application that I got off of the internet. I think it's called time. Let's see what it's called. Time left. So just Google time left, and you'll be able to download this timer and overlay it. You see, it can be moved, so I overlay it on my active trader window. All right, let's add a few more indicators. I don't want to overwhelm you here, but it's helpful if you understand what I look at on an intraday basis to help me make a trading decision. Another important indicator that I am going to show you is overlaying the VIX, which is the short-term volatility index. And it's very helpful in determining what may happen in the market. When this line starts to point up and point up sharply, you have an indication that you're in a strong bearish trend. And vice versa, if you start to see the VIX come down, you'll start to see you have a bullish trend. As you can see here, we had a big reversal because this VXX started to point down sharply. And overall, if you take a look at what's happened with the VIX today in the Russell, it constantly was moving down and down and down. And what happens with price? It started to move up and up and up. So it's another indicator to use along with the others, such as the crossover and the hull and even the ribbons, but probably most importantly the VWAP, as to whether or not you're in the right direction on your trade. There's still a few more studies I'd like to discuss before I close this out. The purpose of this video is to give you an idea what I look at intraday, so that when I describe this in my daily journal logs, you'll have a better understanding of what I'm looking at. This is the third bottom indicator, which is based on the MACD. I found this somewhere on the internet, I don't know where, but I found it helpful because it's pretty accurate in telling you what the short-term price action is doing, and it has Bollinger Bands, as you can see. When the price goes above this line, it's an indication that things are turned bullish. If it stays green, you can see that it's a good indication that you're still in a strong bull trend. However, when it starts to come back into the Bollinger Band, and especially when it turns red, it's an indication that that bullish trend may be over. As you can see, that's what's happening right now. So this is another important indicator that I use. I also have the breadth indicators for both the New York and the NASDAQ. When everything's positive, these will be green. When either or are negative, meaning that there's more sellers than buyers, it'll be red. So it's another reference that you can look at in terms of increasing your confidence as to whether you're going in the right direction. Now, if you come over here, this is a mountain chart of the 3-minute Russell. It instead of showing bars, it's basically showing you a line graph that's filled in. When this is green, this will say up, telling you you're in an uptrend, and that your 8 EMA is currently above your 13. This dotted line is the same whole average that I have on my 3-minute bar chart, and this again is the overlay of the VXX. So it's a different color, but it's probably more visible on this chart than it is down here. So sometimes I just look over here to get a better idea as to what's going on. As you can see here, the VXX is starting to point up in a pretty sharp angle. And what do we have? We have 2 red bars showing up on the 3-minute. But we're still above, the 8 is above the 13, and it's below the hull, which is telling me that things could change pretty quickly to the downside here. But usually at this hour that we're at, around 11:30, we start to see some consolidation. The final study that I'm going to throw up here is another interesting study. It's called the vol squeeze, and you can set it. It has to be set to the current time frame of the chart that you have it on, and in this case it's set to 3 minutes. And I'll show you how I use this. It throws up a label, and it also shows you a box. When price starts to get into this box, you can expect it to turn yellow or neutral. Yellow means that there's a dot, a yellow dot in this range that is telling you you have a vol squeeze that's neutral. There isn't good volatility in either direction. Now, as you can see here, price is broken out of this box, and we saw that label turn green. Well, after this bar closes, if this label is still green, that's a good indication that you may want to go short if all the other indicators are telling you that that's a trade you should take. So that's it. One other thing I want to point out on my chart, and that is the daily chart, which shows basically the overall daily trend of the instrument you're trading, but it also shows the range versus the average true range on a daily basis. So when this is orange or yellowish, it's saying we're approaching the daily average range. When it's red, it's telling you you're already outside that range in terms of price movement. And if it's green, it's telling you you're well within the average range. Where this may be helpful is where you see price go to a point where you think, okay, it's not going to go any lower, and we're probably going to rebound from here, or the same in reverse if it's been a strong bullish trend and we're now seeing a red label on the daily. You're probably thinking, okay, I've already gone outside my average range in price movement, so it may be time to close the trade. That's it in a nutshell. I hope this helps. Part of this channel will be daily journals that I will place going bar by bar and actually placing trades and showing that trade in an unedited format so that you can see exactly what I'm looking at. I try to point out things that I see. What I recommend, even though there's a lot of indicators on this chart, if you follow Al Brooks, he will give you a pretty good idea as to how he uses price action to determine how he trades. And I use price action. I'm always looking at the bar. I know the other indicators may be a distraction, but the actual price action within that 3-minute bar tells you so much. One of the greatest, best setups I've seen, and this is a pretty standard setup that Al Brooks uses, is the H1, H2, and even a possible H3. What that is a bullish move up for the H1 when price again goes below this bar and establishes a higher low, or a higher high rather, which would have been right here. What you look for is for price to break above that higher or that lower high. So in this case we had a doji form, but in this case you can see we had a basic level VWAP. The lines were condensing. We didn't see a strong squeeze, and we had a red dot on the MACD. So this H1 entry I would not have taken. Now, moving forward, we're looking for the next pullback and breakout, and we can't find that in this trend here. However, we did have it here. Here's the high, this is the lower high, and we did have a breakout above that higher high, which was actually our H1. And we also had a signal. That signal did not exist on this bar, so I probably would not have taken that trade either. But when you review my videos of my actual daily trades, you'll get a better idea as how I interpret the H1, H2, H3. And the reverse on that is the L1, L2, which is a lower, higher low, and then a break below that higher low after you've had a pullback from a lower low. I know that's confusing, but if you review my videos of my trading, I try to explain that on each trade that I take. And I believe that's it. Oh, one other thing I want to show you. In my videos, I mentioned measured moves. I do use a Fibonacci tool. It's a basic tool. When I see an upward movement like this, I like to use this by taking my Fibonacci, going to the high of that movement, and bringing it down to the low of that movement. And as you can see, that sets up a potential measured move target, which happens to be right at the open of yesterday. And I can use that as a tool to enter the trade. Now in this situation, with that up there and seeing a breakout right here of an H2, No, actually that's an H3. You can see that we had a good strong movement back up to that line. Just to show you what this tool looks like, this is it here. You may want to take a snapshot of this and set up your Fibonacci tool as it looks right here. You'll find that I use this quite often in my trading, and it's another tool that I use to fine-tune my trades. Well, I think I covered everything here. Hopefully you have enough to better understand how I trade. You can certainly review this as many times as you want, especially after you review my trading journals and see what I'm referring to in each trade that I take. I hope this helps, and we wish you the best in trading. Thank you. Oh, one thing I want to point out is that if you subscribe to my channel, I will make the grid, the TOS grid, available to you with all these indicators so that you can put them on your own TOS chart and try to follow my technique.